evening. Welcome to Asia Society Hong Kong Center. And I think I know many of you here tonight. And those of you who do not know me, one of the interns out there asked me who I am. So some of you may not know who I am. I'm Alice Mong, Executive Director of Asia Society Hong Kong. And I'm really delighted to see a full house tonight here at Miller Theater, and to do an in-person program with this full house audience is really wonderful to see everybody back. And I know some of you still have masks on, which is great, and but it's great to see smiling faces again after what we've been through. And thank you all for being here. And it's really wonderful. I'm really honored that on behalf of Asia Society that we can welcome Professor Vice Chancellor Professor David Gann, University of Oxford, and Miss Cindy Chow of Alibaba Hong Kong Entrepreneurial Fund. Cindy is no stranger to programs here at Asia Society, having helped us moderate some programs in the past. And also, this is the first time we've had the honor of welcoming Professor Gann here, and I know this will be the first of many visits. And thank you all. Tonight's topic, I think it's really it's something that about innovation. And I have to say, I just came back from the States after 3.5 weeks traveling to my alma mater in Columbus, Ohio, and also in Washington, D.C. and New York. And innovation is on top of mind for everyone, whether you are at a 150-year-old land-grant university, like my alma mater, or the Financial Center of New York, Financial and Media Center of New York, or in the Corridor of Power in Washington. It seems like innovation, and of course, ChatGPT, is on everybody's mind these days. And in fact, we've had a speaker, Professor Nigel Shadbolt, who spoke about generative AI just 2 months ago here at Asia Society. And in fact, you're our third visitor, Professor Gann, from Oxford since March. We had Professor Annika Woods speaking here for us from the Blotnick School of Business at Oxford. So we are always happy to collaborate. And I believe innovation is about collaboration, and I don't think innovation works in silos. So this is one of the reasons Asia Society Hong Kong is especially happy that we are able to collaborate with University of Oxford. And again, Jeremy, thank you for, I think I've taken account since I've been here 11 years. I think Oxford University is probably one on the top of our list in terms of collaboration. And I look forward to continue to do that in the coming days. And I look forward to welcoming you all back, whether as members or non-member. And right now, my membership and development team told me we know 25% of you here tonight are members, and the other 75% are not. So those of you who are not, I hope you will consider supporting us. I think it's an organization like Asia Society. I think we're in a unique time, whether we're talking about geopolitical, or we're talking about business and policy, or innovation, issues like innovation that I know Cindy and Professor Gann are very familiar with. I think Asia Society Hong Kong, we see ourselves as a platform, a very important education platform. So we would love to have your support. And there are QR codes in the back. So if you're interested in becoming a member, consider it. And then before I turn the mic over to Cindy, please pick up the book, Demystifying China's Innovation Machine. And Professor Gann is one of the writers. There's only a few copies in the back. So if it's all sold out, we hope to get more copies, and it will be available in our bookstore. And so with that, I'm going to turn it over to Cindy to get our program started this evening. Thank you.
Hello. Yeah. Okay. Hi, Professor. So before I, jump into some questions for Professor, let me do a quick introduction. Professor David Gann is Pro Vice Chancellor, Development and External Affairs at the University of Oxford. He's also the Professor of Innovation and Entrepreneurship at Saïd Business School and Fellow of Magdalen College. David was previously Vice President, Innovation at Imperial College London. He has a PhD in Industrial Economics, is a Chartered Civil Engineer, Fellow of the Institution of Civil Engineers, Honorary Fellow of the Royal College of Art, and Fellow of the City and Guilds Institute. As an entrepreneur, he has formed several companies, mentored startups, and advises boards on innovation and technology development. He is the chairman of the UK Atomic Energy Authority, a global leader in the development of fusion energy. He is also a non-executive director of VenCap International, a leading venture fund of funds. He has also served in a number of listed groups and government boards in the UK, advising on innovation and technology strategy. David was appointed Commander of the Order of the British Empire in 2010 Queen's Birthday Honours for servicing to engineering, and received the 2014 Geraldine C. Coleman's Asset Award for extraordinary contributions to the economic sciences. He was awarded the Imperial College Medal in 2019. And David is also a very passionate supporter of music and arts. He enjoys cycling and skiing, and he also watches rugby and cricket whenever possible. So hopefully you can have, go to a cricket club and watch some cricket before you leave. And he is also a keen beekeeper and gardener. Interesting. And as an university and business leader with extensive international experience in innovation, strategy, and technology management, David's research explores why and how innovation happens, the ways it continually transforms the world we live in, and how it can be managed. Let's all welcome Professor.
Thank you.
So we are going to talk about innovation and also the strategy on managing innovation. But before we go into more detailed questions, can I first ask Professor to set the stage? How do you define innovation? Is it really, talking about ChatGPT or the Vision Pro that Apple just launched, right? So is it just on new technologies? And to follow up on that, after defining innovation, what is your view of the global trend for innovation for the next 5 years, and also the reason for such?
Thank you, Cindy. Really good question. So let's just say that ChatGPT and the Vision Pro from Apple are the fruits of innovation. Okay, so very often we see these things and we think that's an innovation. Innovation in that sense is a noun. It's something that's been produced and an artifact or a service. And the way I think these days is to ask the question, how did that happen? I used to teach innovation and entrepreneurship masters and MBA classes, and I always used to encourage students to walk around and be curious as to, when was this first produced, and whose idea was it, and how did it come about? So for me, I'm more interested in innovation as a verb, which is asking about the processes by which a new idea found its way into our hands or into the street. And the reason why I'm interested in that, and I think we can now say that across the world there are a community of innovation scholars, people who study these things, and there's a very nice body of literature on innovation and the economics and history of innovation. The reason why I'm interested in this is to ask the question, can we manage these processes in a better way so that the fruits of these activities are really useful and do useful things? And we'll come on to your second part of the question through that route. But so first of all, I'm more interested in innovation as a process and whether and how we can manage it. And if we can then intervene in useful ways to get better outcomes. Of course, we want it faster, cheaper, higher quality all the time. But the whole thing then is how do we do it? And are some of the processes themselves innovations? Of course they are. And in your world of Alibaba, many of the things that you've given us are service innovations, new ways of delivering logistics. And those are just as important to lubricate a good society as the products in our hands. We need both. So that's the way I see it. And of course, most innovations are the combinations of ideas and knowledge that have been around for a while. So they're not astoundingly new. And I think ChatGPT and Vision Pro are good examples. We've known something like this has been coming down the track for a while. It doesn't surprise me. Wearing some augmented reality glasses set is not new to the world. But actually, very often it's not the first one there that is the one that will define what it is that will hit the market. I mean, do you remember anyone ever telling you about the Spengler in your house? You don't. But Spengler was the person who invented the vacuum cleaner. In fact, when I was a kid, we used to talk about Hoovers, because Hoover was the brand that made them. And we used to talk about hoovering as a process. We hoover the carpet. But, of course, now Dyson from my country. I don't think we talk about Dysoning the living room, do we? But so it's not often the first to market that is always the winner and the one that gets remembered. Very often it's the incremental improvements that others are able to make, and they get the cost down so that the mass market takes off. Occasionally we get radical breakthroughs, and that takes a lot of heavy lifting, a lot of time. I'm involved in that with the Atomic Energy Authority and a community of amazing scientists around the world to develop fusion energy, and we might talk about that in a minute. So very occasionally we have these radical changes that upset whole industries and create new ones, but most of the time we're in the domain of incremental additional improvements. What are the most important things, was your second question, in the next 5 years or so, right? Well, I think whether it's the next 5 years or the rest of our lives, the way in which we deploy ingenuity, the ingredients of any innovation process is the ability to assemble new ideas, tackle problems, find better solutions, do things in a different way that serve a good purpose. The most pressing thing that any of us can work on is dealing with climate change. And the world really can't wait any longer at all. My colleague Jeremy comes from Canada, and the heat wave and the wildfires in eastern Canada are causing people in New York to choke at the moment, according to the news. I saw the weather forecast for my country this weekend is going to be an excessive heat wave, and they're already in June talking about water shortages in the south of England, and it goes on. So we know it. I think it's beyond any dispute that this is happening to us, and it's happening at a frightening rate. And just let you think about how you understand the processes here. If you put a pan of water on a hob to heat it up, it takes a little while before the energy starts to build up in the water, and you can put your finger in and walk away and it still hasn't warmed up very much. And then suddenly it gets quite excited and gets hotter and hotter, quicker and quicker, and you burn yourself, and actually it takes a little while to cool down. Well, we've got to that point where you're not going to put your finger in. The climate is really in trouble. So we need to deploy all of that ingenuity that the world is really good at, and this part of the world has plenty to offer. And we need to think, how are we going to tackle the emissions we create, and how are we going to be able to cool our buildings in this part of the world without destroying the planet, and preserve, food chains, supply chains. All of these things are going to require an enormous effort. And it relates to the second area that Oxford University has been really excelling in, thankfully, which is in healthcare, and particularly in pandemic preparedness. None of us want to live through what happened and started about 3.5 years ago. And we've experienced it. Luckily, although it's been terrible, it's not the deadliest of viruses that might hit us. And we need to make sure that our innovation dollars are put into the insurance policies, which is the great science and preparedness teams that can also do other good work and create vaccines for malaria or dengue fever or whatever else. And we have to have some really good attention to health, and there will be other things too: mental health, aging, and all of these things. So I think whilst it's great to have the sort of PlayStation style innovation, and we all want some of that, and we need markets to flow from these things, we need some serious heavyweight stuff, and we need to get that really moving right now. We're doing good work on this. We've got to put a force multiplier on it, really, Cindy. Yeah.
I totally agree. And as a VC investor, we always say we want to invest in startups that solve a problem. Because once, if you have a problem, then that means there will be a market demand for the service or the product. And so it would bring return to our investments. So I totally agree. These are really pressing issues that we want to solve. And I hope that I will see more startups coming with more innovative ideas. But of course, I guess everyone in the room will support innovation. However, I think there may be also adverse effect from innovation. Last month, World Economic Forum issued the Future of Jobs report, and among other findings from their survey, it is estimated that digital transformation, like the adoption of AI, will lead to a net decrease of 14 million jobs before 2027, so just a few years down the road. So, Professor, how should like the private sector or the public sector manage this fear for having losing your job or losing especially losing your job? What can they do to manage the fear?
Well, before I come on to the specifics in today's world, we've lived through many iterations of the same sort of question and fear, and first of all, innovation can throw up unintended consequences, and it's really important for always to keep this in mind. And part of the climate crisis I was just mentioning about is the unintended consequences of how we've developed power. There's a curious story actually on the journey there about how science was deployed to improve efficiency in the internal combustion engine. I mean, it wasn't that long ago that we used to put lead in petrol because it provided a smoother engine. And of course, we had to ban it because the pollution with lead in the air was damaging the brains of school children in our schools. And, it wasn't long after that we put CFCs into aerosols as a propellant, and we blew a hole in the ozone layer. And I'm sure the scientists who worked on those products weren't intending to cause those problems. And I think what we really need, and now we know that we can do sometimes harm accidentally, we do need to look, and we got more scientists and engineers and technologists alive today than lived in total in the rest of history. I think we do need our universities and research organizations and companies that invest properly in R&D to also look at the possibility that unintended consequences will happen. Now, you asked me about AI and the future of jobs. And first of all, I haven't read that particular World Economic Forum report, although I do engage quite a lot with the World Economic Forum. The question of displacing jobs when you have major shifts in technology is, again, not a new one. And it's not always a bad one. I'd rather that we didn't have people working down in mines in Australia. Well, it's machines in Australia, it's kids in South Africa. Because I'd rather we didn't mine some of the stuff out of the ground. But we've got plenty of good things that people can do. And I think with AI, it's going to be really one of those technologies that we've got to understand the human possibility for, and what the awful consequences might be. And there are probably quite a lot of people, even in this city, who are doing jobs that it might be better for the AI system to take over. We shouldn't just let that happen without caring about people being displaced. You know, I'd rather keep a beautiful garden than live in a jungle most of the time. So a little bit of management of how we introduce these things. And of course, there are plenty of jobs that AI might create. And so I think often when there's a fear of this, sometimes people can't quite see the upside of new opportunities and the new roles that will be created using these tools. And so I'm not particularly worried about job displacement. It will happen as long as we have some smooth pathway. And of course, educational establishments need to help re-kit people, retool. And you know, the world's moving quickly, so we don't expect jobs for life anymore in the same role. And so as long as we can help people transition, that doesn't worry me so much, Cindy. Yeah.
I agree. So coming closer to this, to Asia, I really want to seek your views on the outlook for China. In your book, Demystifying China's Innovation Machine, you attribute the progress of innovation in China, among other things, to the 2008 financial crisis, because at that time the government has to solve the problem of reducing demand in manufacturing and also the rising unemployment at that time. So at that time they really tried to encourage technology entrepreneurship, and Alibaba, of course, is one of the benefiter from these policies. So how do you see, the outlook for China in terms of innovation? Because it is now, in this very difficult geopolitical situation, and unemployment rates among the youth is about 20%. So what's your view on, the development of this innovation machine, as you term it in your book? And how would that change also impact the innovation ecosystem globally?
Yeah. Can I unpack some of those questions step by step?
Sure.
Yeah. First of all, I and my colleagues wrote that book mostly before the COVID crisis. And the last time I was here was 18th of December 2019. So I haven't been, and I was in China 7 times that year talking to people and going into labs and trying to understand what was going on. So I am interested in learning as much from you and people in the room about what's happening right now as saying what's happening right now. So with that precursor, first of all, the history of innovation in China goes back 4,000 years or more. So, the West, or US, Europe, has absolutely no monopoly. It is just the recent period of time when industrial development really took off in certain regions that China has been now catching up. And, the advances in China, as everyone knows, since 1980 have been absolutely enormous. I think the first observation that we have is that China's the first major country to industrialize using a sort of manufacturing-led growth strategy. In some ways similar to Germany, South Korea, Japan. If you take that period from, say, 1950 to 1970, 1980, those countries moved up the value chain in manufacturing and became very powerful economically. China's the first country to pursue that, where in the last 20 years, it's been really digitally enabled. And what's fascinating for me is to see that advanced manufacturing strategy being propelled, certainly inside China, through amazing digital infrastructure. And I think that's done a lot of things. It's given us probably the best logistics and supply chain capability that one could ever imagine, and your company is a really great example of it. You know, sometimes sitting in the US, you forget just how good this China machine is, and its ability to deliver through networks and deliver very, very quickly is second to none. So first of all, big applause and congratulations to the development of this. And one example, in November last year when the Queen of England died, was that I think within 11 hours of the announcement of her passing, a ship set sail from China with the memorabilia to be sold in London, with the date on it and all the pictures and the flags and everything. And that ship was full of merchandise that was manufactured in the network so rapidly and assembled and put on the ship and sent to London. I don't think there's another country in the world that could do that. And that's an amazing set of achievements, right? So first of all, we've seen something that I don't think the world's seen before. And we've seen amazing investment then on the back of that to make it happen with, for example, the amount of high-speed rail, which also is another indication of moving up into the top tier of capability, because, you know, high-speed rail and the trains that run on that are complex systems and their management and use. And I've been on them, and my internet's been stable, and it's been 5G all the way. Well done, Huawei, as well, you know. So all of those things are signs of a fantastic capability. Some people in Europe and America think that this is mandated by the state, and that you know, this is a hierarchy that sets out what needs to be done, and then people execute. Well, our book shows it doesn't happen like that at all. China has an incredible bottom-up entrepreneurial capability, which is differentiated regionally. And now you'll know far better than people in the room, far better than I do, what that feels like. I have a good sense from traveling and talking in different regions, but and competing internally, you know, regionally, which is also extremely healthy in terms of stimulating economic growth and progress and markets. So it's also a rather large place with a lot of people. So all of these things add up to a very, very powerful system and machine. And in fact, I find some government policy ambiguous, to the point it might even be deliberately ambiguous, because it allows things to happen. And that sort of experimentation is what you need in innovation. You don't want to just set out your standards on day one and expect people to work to them. You want to allow some room for some trials and things to happen. So, you know, I think from all of those regards, China's developed an ecosystem, particularly based on the manufacturing and moving up the value chain. Where do I think there's room for more development? Well, what is it, 23% of R&D at the moment, but only 6% on fundamental research. Great investment in universities. Until COVID, certainly, bringing top professors back from Western universities and building great labs. But to my mind and my colleagues and analysis of the outputs from research, not yet fully competitive internationally in fundamentals. And, you know, publishing, yes, bibliometrics high, patenting good, but not too much coming across the frontier into blue water as absolute new to the world. And so will that happen? I think we have to come back here in 20, 25 years' time, because the gestation period for that really to roll forward takes time. And so we don't know. And there are some crosswinds which might slow it down. So I think the jury's out as to whether China's innovation machine will become totally self-propelled into the future. And we might actually, Cindy, talk about collaboration and how important that is with other countries and the university system in a minute. Yeah.
Of course, definitely. So I want to, follow up on your points about having bottoms up, right? About, innovators, right? Instead of a directional policies from the government in driving innovation. So in Hong Kong, right, the government is putting a lot of money into the ecosystem. So for investors like the fund that I'm running, of course, we benefit from that because we have a lot of money to drive a valuation for our startups. But is it really good to have so much government involvement? And how would you, recommend the Hong Kong government to balance between policies and also allowing, bottom-up innovations?
Yeah. You have to find your own rhythm with government in different jurisdictions, but in general, I'm someone who likes tough love, right? So what do I mean by that? Well, I think you've got to expose new ideas to the rigors of markets and competition fairly early on, not least because you've got to have entrepreneurial leaders who are prepared to do the hard yards to prove what it is that their idea can be sustained. And so, as you will do as an investor, half the time we're trying to kill the idea just to see how resilient it is, right? And of course, you want entrepreneurs who are going to roll with that and be resilient and pivot when they've used resources and they got something, and often it might end up in a slightly different place, which is also why really good venture capital is useful, because it's a good tensioning point, and people like yourself sitting on boards of early stage companies will help sort those ideas out in the market. I think governments, by and large, should stay out of that game. Okay, they should never try and pick winners, and they shouldn't try and manage the future of these companies. But they should create environments that will foster communities so that you're not just an outlier. And then a number of things come into effect. So the places in the world that venture capital goes to are quite easy to locate. And there are concentrations in different parts of the world. Normally, there's at least one top university. In this city, you've got several, so you can tick that box. We can talk about whether the universities are really modernizing quickly enough as a secondary question. But I was working at Imperial College for a long time. I was responsible for the innovation system there, and now Oxford. And you've got the Golden Triangle: Oxford, Cambridge, London, and it has incredible strength and depth in innovation. And that's partly because it has more than its fair share of top-level universities, which are engine rooms for new ideas. Research-led universities, by default, are pushing boundaries in labs that most people would think were too risky. So you need high-quality deal flow ideas, and you need the talent to mobilize those ideas. And universities also have a regular flow of bright people coming out who can go and start working with these ideas. So Hong Kong has those. Government policies around how to maximize those benefits it could be useful, stimulating those universities to break out of their traditional boundaries. These days we want to see multidisciplinary teams tackling big challenges rather than more traditional inward-looking work, and making it a good place for young people to hang around. You want good cafes, you want good things for people to do, so they want to stay here. And then a convivial place to set up your company. You want to get rid of any tax impediments and all of these things. So government can create the right conditions, and then probably stand back and watch what happens rather than get too involved, and bring people like yourself. And, I think corporate venture capital is really interesting, and there's plenty of it around. And, another good thing about big companies is that it gives little companies a very quick route to market sometimes. And so, you know, another thing, apart from looking for good universities with ideas and talent, I'm always looking to see, are there big companies that know how to get into markets globally in the vicinity that those startups could start to get to know? And if there are, then you probably see some decent venture capitalists around as well, and you've got the ingredients to get going. And governments can help with some of that. So, you know, my government has been quite good over the last 10 years, helping some inward investment from some of the larger tech businesses in the US. And that's been really helpful because, you know, we've had the big names there, and we can then get our startups to buddy up with them. And that's got us into the US markets very quickly, actually. And we need to see more of that sort of thing happen.
Right, yeah. I totally agree because from my experience with managing startups, a lot of times the opportunities to have the proof of concept, you know, to testing is more important than sometimes than money, than the capital. So opportunities, especially from large corporates, is indispensable in helping the whole ecosystem to grow. So this question is more, you know, helping me to, you know, run the fund. When we pick entrepreneurs or startups to back up, we often, you know, will say, okay, you have a good product, have a very good business model, and also the founding team has to be very entrepreneurial. The definition meaning very resilient, very flexible, etc. But so in your experience in advising a lot of startups, how do you weigh between innovation and entrepreneurial spirits? And what are the common reasons for innovation failures? They may have very good, you know, good product, but still they can't, you know, success.
Yeah. Let me tackle the failure one first. Very often and I've worked, I mean, I'm a bit skewed towards the science-based and deep tech entrepreneurs because I've worked at Imperial College and now Oxford, and you know, I'm trying to get the really difficult stuff out of the lab, and a lot of times if it's the sort of app-based firm, they don't need us, and you don't have very big costs even to get your business going. But if you're in the life sciences, if you're in clean tech and environment dealing with molecules, first of all, the barriers to starting are absolutely enormous because you probably at some point pretty soon need a wet lab. If you've never worked in a wet lab, well, a Cat 2 wet lab has fume hood, has gases, allows you to work with molecules. You're not going to get much done in a lot of healthcare areas without that, and if we're going to design new batteries, energy storage, work in the hydrogen economy and so on, you're going to need to have facilities. Now, if you're starting up a company and you need those facilities, your family and friends probably aren't going to lend you enough money to get you started, and if you go and talk to the bank manager, they're not going to give you a loan for that stuff because it's too expensive. So who's going to bear the cost of that early stage? And at the moment, you know, governments can help. Universities often put incubators together and will take something of a hit in the first stage because someone's got to pay for this. And actually, one of the problems of liberating the life sciences opportunities and dealing with clean tech and environment is that we just don't have enough spaces for startups to get going in. So I think that's one of the issues. But then after that, the failure, so that they failed before they started some ideas. The other issue I've seen is not failure because of the technology, it's failure because of the lack of management expertise to grow the company. And we often have entrepreneurs who are so in love with their technology they forget that they've got to run a business and they need a chief finance officer who really doesn't care about the technology but cares about the money, and they've got to watch cash burn and all of these things. So it's getting the right combination in the team, and then that will very quickly, when you start having money and equity involved, relate to, who owns it and how much money is coming into it and who thinks they're going to make money at the other end. And unfortunately, some entrepreneurs think everything was invented in their bedroom and they should hold 100% of it. And it never happens because they're not prepared to engage. So innovation, entrepreneurs, the entrepreneurial bit of the system is the risk-taking ideation and getting things up and running. And then the innovation bit comes in when you really have to build teams and make some serious decisions about what you're not going to do. And if I'm doing bits of venture investing and my money's involved, I normally take a bet on a team that's failed a few times because at least they've learned some lessons. And I'd rather work with a team that's been through that bit than my money go through that bit. So, and that doesn't mean to say that people shouldn't start, and we do need seed funding for those as well. Maybe Alibaba helps the other ones.
We will try to do our part as much as possible, and I guess that's very, very useful. I mean, what not to do is is the key, and also a lot of times when I meet companies that spun off from universities, the scientists are not entrepreneurial enough. So they need to have someone on their team to be, really driving the business. A lot of times the scientists will tell me, oh, Cindy, I'm just in love with research. I don't want to make money. Even they want to pitch for capital. So that I think we still have about 15 minutes time, which we would open up to the floor for questions. So anyone? Yes, please.
Thank you so much for the sharing and your valuable time. I have a question. So, I see in the United States, the Silicon Valley encourage a lot of the immigrants, a lot of the talent people to be there and to survive there. But I see in China, there's a 户口 system that sometimes like block people to migrate from one city to another. I was wondering, how do you suggest in a policy point of view to help to tackle this kind of innovation situation? And my another question is, in China, there's also kind of like a political control, right? Like how you sort of like balance between the political control and this. Thank you.
Yeah, they're tough questions for me to answer. Let me have a go. First of all, there's innovation that needs to happen because you've got a desperate problem or a crisis like a virus infecting everyone. You don't even know what it is, and you need to get onto it, and that's COVID. And in those circumstances, you almost go onto a war footing. Government gets involved. You bring your top talent teams in from your universities, and you focus on a problem. And, university academics don't have a choice of saying, oh, I want to go back to my research. You focus on trying to stop people dying from COVID. And that's one type of scenario. I think the other type, which is in the free market, is innovation often, and you mentioned the immigrants in the west coast of America, innovation often happens because of the sort of creative abrasion you have when you have differences. Because if we all look in the same direction, we won't see something to the side of us. And, good entrepreneurs almost have a sixth sense. There's a different combination of ideas that's going to work. And they have a sixth sense about timing as well. Because you want to catch the wave. You want to go too early and you want to be the one after the wave. So that happens when you've got communities of people who have different viewpoints. And that's the creative abrasion side, which, for a good few decades has worked quite well in the Bay Area, in a particular area of digital technologies. It's working quite well in parts of the Golden Triangle in my country and across Europe. I don't know how well that bit works in China, and that's the bit which may relate to my question about the fundamentals here. If you're in fundamental research, and my impoverished brain because of jet lag can't remember the woman's name who developed mRNA. But she was pushed out by the academic community in the West as an outlier, that they said this technology ain't any good. And she just happened to be extremely resilient and kept trying to win research grants and build her research. And look what we've got. We've got 2 vaccines built on this technology now. And thank God she pursued it. So you need that personal desire, and you need to be a bit different and see something a little bit different. These days, if you're going to do mRNA, you've also got to get your hands on resources, because you've got to have a lab where you can do that stuff, and you've got to be pretty damn good, and you've got to have a team. So you've got to be special to make it happen. And I think that, you know, the if I could call it the Western liberal sort of ideas world in our universities, cherishes that and allows that to happen. And that's how we, you know, we have huge arguments and rows. And, you know, I look after the public affairs team at Oxford, and half the things we don't want in the press are the arguments that our academics are having amongst themselves, because it looks like we can't agree on anything. Well, we don't mind that if you read it in the right way, but people make mischief out of that. But that's actually very healthy. That's how new ideas get tested. And actually, you know, I would stand firm in supporting that. And at that level, you know, Oxford, Imperial, Cambridge, these universities tell our government, get out of our way. You know, we don't want your constraints stopping our ideas, and we don't want anyone's constraints to. We'll work within legal limits, health and safety, respect for others, and so on. All of these things, environmental protection. But we do not want any boundaries around the way in which ideas flow and are discussed, because that's the engine room. So on that second side, that's the, you know, the celebration of difference is where we want. And actually, I'll just give you a quick example of this. So in Imperial, if you've ever been there, you know, it's a rather good engineering and science-based university that will take on anyone, and particularly happy to take on MIT from time to time. But it happened to grow up in a world which was very male-dominated, and it was only in the last decade and a half, and now we have, thankfully, a lot of more women in engineering and so on, that we had the sponsorship of a women's entrepreneurs program with prizes for women-only companies. And, you know, I should have thought of this before and known it, but, you know, what slightly surprised me is the companies that were being formed were companies that were new to the world with products that were different, because women had developed them. Because previously we were being serviced by, you know, the male mind, if you like. And so it wasn't a zero-sum game. This was an additional, massive new range of things opening up because people had an opportunity. That's, again, in a way, the celebration of difference that allows innovation to be fruitful. And we need to, in my view, we need to do more of that rather than less of it. Yeah.
Totally agree. Yes.
Professor Gann, thank you very much for your sharing. I really appreciate your idea of talking about innovations as a verb, where we would talk about innovations as a process of discovering new ideas. When you talked about using innovation to solve pressing issues like climate change, it makes me a little uncomfortable, because this kind of conventional narrative seems to put so much emphasis on science, and we are putting a lot of, well, maybe pressure is not the right word, but we are really asking our scientists to do a lot. I mean, we are all secretly rooting for the scientists who could invent something that could suck out all of the carbon dioxide from the atmosphere and then clear up all of the ocean wastes. But then for the rest of the humanity, it seems that there's nothing much that we can do. So my question is twofold. I wonder whether it is possible to talk about innovation without such an outsized emphasis on science and commercialization. So using the example of climate change that you have pointed out, for instance, if we were to think about, you know, using half amounts of plastics that we all use, what would the impacts of that on humanity? Now, of course, that idea in itself is not innovative at all. That's what we teach our children, that's what we tell our students and colleagues and so on. But if we could have a prestigious institution like Oxford to do some research, to make a point about, oh, these are the simple things that one could do in your daily activities, and that could make a huge change to the climate, then we can all achieve, then the world will achieve um, net zero and something like that. I mean, in that case, would that not be considered an innovative idea? Now, if that could be considered an innovation, then what could Oxford or government or Alibaba do something to encourage the rest of us to help the world? Thank you.
It's you make a really, really good point. And, I suppose, you've got someone here in me who is rather biased towards the deep science viewpoint, because that's my role in the main, has been, to try and support, and it's so difficult to do. But I should then agree with you completely and say that there are many things that we need to do in social policy, as individuals and as families and as friends, that will make a difference. So, and yes, it's a sort of innovation, isn't it? I mean, you have certainly innovation in policy, and there was a great area that evolved probably about 15 years ago, which was this idea of nudge in economics, and that actually you could start to nudge people along, and now we have social data off our watches about ourselves, and we can sometimes share it with our friends. It changes our behavior a bit about things we'd rather stop doing and things we might want to do, and how we spend our time. I think that we have lots of policy opportunities. The British government, number 10, where the Prime Minister is, had the nudge unit for quite a long time. And I think they were quite effective in some of the policies that they put out to help people. And so I agree with you. And, one other thing to say is that some of these problems are so large that they do almost stifle us into a state of inability to do anything, because you feel you're just a small cog in a big machine, and that's disabling, and that's not helpful either. I think from a science point of view, we've got better and better at science communication, and we need now to expect science to be able to engage in layperson's terms. And I think that's terrifically important, because the sort of bifurcation, the lack of trust that you get otherwise, is equally unhelpful, particularly in political processes where you've got to look at budget allocation and so on. Because particularly in my part of the world, governments want to go with something that's popular. And if the general public don't understand, for example, fusion, which is one of the big things we're trying to develop in the UK and around the world at the moment, then it's not going to be very useful to get the budget allocated. So all of these things come together. What does Oxford do about this? Well, Oxford does quite a lot about this, actually, because we have, historically, 900 years of history in humanities, in ethics, in philosophy. Probably only in our recent history have we been one of the best places, and number one in medicine now for 12 years, the best medical faculty and science. And in the last 3 years, we've just set up a new center on ethics in AI. And we're quite strongly protecting that from influence so that it can make independent work in the public realm about what's happening with the rollout of these amazing AI capabilities like ChatGPT. And actually, great universities like Oxford and others, that, I think, is their public duty, to deploy great minds on these conundrums and engage the public. And, it wouldn't be good enough just to have a center on ethics in AI that talked to itself or talked to other ethics professors. It has to get out there. from the World Economic Forum to the local village church or hall and have discussions on this stuff. Otherwise, it won't be effective. So I'm really happy at Oxford because I've been there 2.5 years, and there's a lot of that happening, and we've got really good people communicating in that way. And you had Nigel Shadbolt a few months ago speaking here, and he's one of the leaders of that centre now too. Yeah.
So I think we still have time for one more question. Anyone? Yes.
We have all of these sort of problems being solved in our life and sort of unprecedented investment in innovation. Yet in most major cities around the world, when they ask people, they say that they feel less happy than before, less healthy, and in real terms their wages are lower. So where are we going wrong with all the problems being solved, but quality of life seeming to get worse?
Yeah, I think, isn't it true you're more likely to die of obesity than you are of a disease these days? I mean, isn't that just an incredible situation that yet there are still people who are starving and don't have water, clean water to drink. So, yeah, I think this is a perennial issue, and I'm not qualified to comment on whether we're in a worse state now than we were before. I think you can read the stats on quality of life, but the perception of that is another matter. And Oxford is establishing a new mental health institute because we have great neuroscience, we've got great psychology, but at the moment that work isn't really picking up on some of the pressing need. One area they were talking about is the age band between 16 and 24, where there's a much higher prevalence of mental health issues than previously. And of course we have at the other end of life dementia and Alzheimer's, which 100 years ago we didn't have because people didn't live that long. So, something else fell apart in their body before their brain. And, we make some progress and we have to then go sideways and make some more progress. But a lot of what you're asking, I think, is in the realms of economics and social policy and culture. And, I was in Tokyo at the weekend, and I love Tokyo. And, it's one of the world's biggest cities with the smallest income differential between high and low paid workers. And I don't know whether they're happier, but they don't seem unhappy when you just casually walk around Tokyo. It's an amazing place. So, of course, people at Oxford and elsewhere study these things, and I'd rather defer to them to answer you properly than conjecture any further. Yeah.
So I think, so that concludes our discussion today. And of course, we can still have our networking session. Yeah. And so once again, thanks Professor David Gann for spending time with us and also sharing his insights on innovation and also technology management. Thanks again.
Thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, my name is Jeremy Woodall. I have the distinct pleasure of running one of Oxford's Asia offices located here in Hong Kong. It has fallen to me to close the program, and I recognize that I am the person standing in between you and a glass of wine. But bear with me for a moment, and do join me in thanking Cindy and David again for sharing with us a talk that both helped to get at innovation from that systems level, the macro level, as well as some great individual examples of entrepreneurship that we can relate to in our own lives. I want to say a sincere thanks to our friends at Asia Society, Holly, Kelvin, Alice, and all your colleagues. It's really amazing to be able to work with an organization like this. Oxford has a deep connection to Hong Kong. We have visitors that come on a regular basis, and the ability to come and speak with a broad audience at Asia Society is deeply meaningful for us. And thank you to you. Thank you for coming. It's wonderful that you could be here. To the Oxford alumni in the room, we're really delighted to be connecting with you here. And I've got a little homework for you. If there's one thing that we could ask from you, it's to give us some feedback. We really would like to know, are we getting it right? Are there topics that you want to hear about? Are there things that we could be doing that will enrich your life and help to share the intellectual mission of the university a little better with you here in Hong Kong? And for those of you who are not Oxonians, it's a great time for a master's degree. So I can talk to you about that afterwards. Now, the program is not over. We've got another half hour or so where Asia Society has got a little wine reception for mixing and mingling. Calvin, did we find out? All right. Asia Society has very kindly extended the hours of the gallery just around the corner. So if you wanted to see the Fusion exhibit, that's going to be open until 8 o'clock. But they ask that you not bring any food or drink into the gallery. But please do enjoy the exhibit there. And before we break and kind of move on to that portion of the evening, I just wonder if we could find out about one another a little bit more to help launch us into the networking. Just by show of hands, who is from Oxford here? Oh, fantastic. Who is an Asia Society member who didn't have the chance to go to Oxford? Oh, very welcome. Good, great, fantastic. Is there anyone here who works in the field of innovation in some way? All right, fair. Great. And how about entrepreneurs? Are there people here who have started or are running their own companies? No, so now that is an impressive group. Fantastic. Well, we've got time to catch up with one another, enjoy a drink, and once again, thank you so much for joining us this evening. David, Cindy, thanks so much.